Prime Minister Winston Churchill is confronted with a major crisis. Nazi Germany has unleashed a new secret weapon against convoys bringing food from America to the starving people of Britain. It is the Focke-Wulf Condor, the first military aircraft able to fly within range of the United States eastern seaboard. Churchill christens the Condor the Scourge of the Atlantic. The Condors wreak destruction on a massive scale. In a matter of months, they sink nearly 1 million tons of Allied shipping. The Condor crews are the elite of the Luftwaffe. They mount daring bombing attacks at low altitudes. But the Condors have another, even more sinister role to play.
The Condor served two roles for the German Navy. It was a bomber attacking Allied ships, but it also became the eyes and ears of the U-boat fleet, able to spot oncoming convoys and signal their presence to the U-boat commanders.
There were areas in the Atlantic where the Allies could provide their merchant convoys with no protection against German reconnaissance and bombing aircraft. That meant in those areas that the Germans could send either long-range bombers or long-range reconnaissance aircraft to spot and to direct the U-boats into those areas. And it was those areas that the U-boats had freedom of movement to attack the convoys.
The alliance between Condors and U-boats threatens to bring Britain to her knees. Winston Churchill admits it is his greatest concern. Desperate for a solution, Churchill suggests a daring plan. British and American battleships are equipped with steam-powered catapults that launch spotter planes. Could such a catapult device be installed on the decks of merchant ships to launch fighter aircraft? But no existing catapult is powerful enough to launch a heavy fighter like the Hurricane. So Churchill seeks help from a top-secret research unit called the Royal Aircraft Establishment, located in Farnborough, England. The scientists respond in just 1 week with an incredible way to launch a Hurricane from the deck of a cargo ship.
It was decided to use a rocket sledge in order to get the Hurricanes airborne. And if you think about it, it's the only way you're going to get a fully armed and fully fueled Hurricane fighter aircraft airborne off the deck of a merchantman in a very short space.
The catapult is powered by a cluster of 13 solid fuel rockets. It is the biggest slingshot in military history since the time of the Romans. But will it work in combat?
Launching the Hurricane from a ship by a rocket-powered catapult is not as easy as you think. First of all, the rocket had to reach a speed instantaneously that was sufficient to get the plane off the deck, otherwise it would drop into the sea. Equally, the kick of the rocket couldn't be too fast, otherwise the acceleration might break the pilot's neck.
The first manned test flight is successful, but there is one major problem with the catapult idea. Once launched, there is no way the pilot can return to the ship.
The principal reason for the introduction of the Hurricat was essentially as a stopgap measure. This is a one-way mission and possibly a suicide mission.
The modified Hurricanes, called Hurricats, will be flown only by volunteers. The first battle between a Hurricat and a Condor is on August 3rd, 1941. The Hurricat pilot is a former jockey and winner of the Grand National, Robert Everett. It is the ultimate test of this new tactic and the most daunting mission Everett has ever faced.
I would feel very anxious, not only just getting airborne off that kind of rocket-powered contraption, but then engaging a very heavily armed bomber, and then knowing that even if you weren't shot down, that you were going to ditch in the sea anyway. That kind of mission profile fills me with anxiety.
High in the clouds above the convoy, the patrolling German Condor does not see the rocket fire from Everett's launch. The German pilot is taken by surprise, but still manages to damage the Hurricat with his gunfire.
When Everett closed with the Condor, he discovered a problem. The Condor was bristling with defensive armament. It carried 8 machine guns and a heavy cannon, and those soon took a toll of his aircraft.
Knowing he is all that stands between the convoy and its destruction, Everett fires the last of his ammunition into the Condor's cockpit. the Nazi bomber goes down in flames, the first to be destroyed by a Hurricat. But Everett is not yet out of danger.
In a situation like this, you know that if you make one false move, you're not going to survive. If you don't find the convoy, they're certainly not going to find you. You're 40 or 50 miles away, and you could be anywhere as far as they're concerned, in any direction. So unless you find that convoy, you are almost certainly dead.
His luck holds. Everett nurses his aircraft to an altitude of 2,000 feet and spots the convoy. He lands on the water near the British ships, but his Hurricat quickly begins to sink.
The Hurricane was a very dangerous aircraft to try and land in the sea. It tipped over very easily, and that's what happened to Everett. As soon as he hit the water, the plane flipped over on its back and began to sink, and down he went with it. He had to fight very hard to get the cockpit canopy open, and he was very lucky to manage to struggle to the surface.
King George VI awards Everett the Distinguished Service Order for shooting down the Condor. Everett is killed the following year while in active service. But the Hurricat ships have turned the tide against the Condors.
I think the principal success of the Hurricats was the deterrent effect it had on German reconnaissance aircraft, in that after they were intercepted and after the first one was shot down, the Germans were less and less inclined to press home attacks or reconnaissance missions against convoys.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, an engineer's out-of-this-world imagination takes flight. You are watching Secret Allied Aircraft of World War II here on the History Channel. In early 1943, citizens of Stratford, Connecticut, report sightings of strange saucer-shaped objects flying overhead. This flying saucer is America's first near-vertical takeoff aircraft, and just might be the answer to the problem of providing ships at sea with fighter cover. Nicknamed the Flying Flapjack, it is the brainchild of a maverick genius, Charles H. Zimmerman.
Charles Zimmerman typified the kind of engineer that we saw in the United States emerging and working in the field after the 1920s.
America discovered that she was very far behind the European countries in the development of high-performance fighter aircraft. Charles Zimmerman was one of the people who led the drive to make up that deficit.
In 1933, Zimmerman joined the NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, the predecessor of today's NASA.
The NACA was an extraordinary organization in that it rebuilt the technical excellence of American technical work. The NACA created, for example, a far better understanding of how one should design wings.
At NACA, Zimmerman's objective is to find the perfect wing shape. As a result, he will design an aircraft that is still way ahead of its time.
He is fascinated by the notion of developing an airplane that has a tremendous speed range, that on one hand would have a very high-end top speed, on the other hand would have a very low-end landing speed.
An ordinary aircraft wing has a wingspan from root to tip in order to create lift. This is called a high aspect ratio wing.
The way an aircraft wing works is by creating different areas of pressure. What this means is that we have the wing here, and as the airflow hits the leading edge, it has further to travel from there to there as it does from there to there. This creates low pressure here and high pressure here. And as the air tries to get from the high pressure area to the low pressure area, it pushes the wing up.
But an ordinary aircraft wing has a great drawback. The wide high aspect ratio wing creates a drag effect against the airflow, which slows the aircraft down. But Charles Zimmerman has an answer to this problem.
The idea was, why don't I have a much smaller wing, a much lower aspect ratio wing?
A narrow wing creates less drag, allowing for faster speed, but it too is problematic.
when the spill happens over the side of those short stubby wings, as happens on all wings, as the air moves from the low to the high pressure, it causes turbulence on the edge of the wing and therefore reduces lift and increases drag. Now the effect that has overall on the wing is greater on short stubby wings as opposed to long wings.
To force its way through this turbulence, the aircraft burns more fuel. But Charles Zimmermann is the first man to discover a solution to this concern.
Zimmermann's solution to the problem was breathtakingly simple. To stop the air from spilling out under the wingtips, he decided to move the engines to the wingtips so that the spinning blades of the propellers pushed the air back under the wing.
With the turbulence problem solved, the narrow wing allows for less drag and greater speed. But the new design has another revolutionary property: vertical takeoff.
What he's looking at is something in many ways that's akin to what we would consider the tilt rotor today. His idea basically is to develop what we would call a super STOL, a super short takeoff and landing airplane.
Zimmermann discovers that the unique characteristics of the low aspect ratio wing, combined with the wingtip propellers, means the aircraft literally floats off the ground vertically in a stiff breeze. In 1939, as war clouds gather over Europe and the Pacific, the U.S. Navy orders a prototype fighter based on Zimmermann's revolutionary concept. It is called the V-173. It has a wingspan of only 23 feet, minuscule by today's standards. To save time on the test design, a fixed undercarriage is used. The tall legs set the aircraft at the best angle to ensure immediate takeoff. The cockpit extends under the aircraft, providing a more extensive view like a helicopter. The V-173 flies for the first time on November 23, 1942, with Vaught's chief test pilot, Boone T. Guyton, at the controls.
On the very first flight, Boone Guyton had some real problems. The aircraft almost went out of control, but it flew so slowly, he got it back on the ground. There they discovered that the problem wasn't in the design of the aircraft itself, it's simply that the controls had been wired up incorrectly.
The V-173, like many experimental airplanes, was an airplane that was not really suited for production itself. It demonstrated the basic concept that Zimmermann was trying to achieve, the fact that you could develop a controllable aircraft that had a reasonable range between low speed and high speed, that had all the attributes of a STOL aircraft.
After some adjustments, the Flying Flapjack soon performs as Zimmermann predicted. Facing into a 25-mile-per-hour wind, the V-173 literally takes off vertically.
The V-173 was an aircraft that was a challenging machine to fly, but having accepted its limitations,